The goalkeeper position should be a main priority for Manchester United this summer, and I'm going to show you just how De Gea is affecting United's build-up and why this pro-De Gea agenda is nonsensical, whilst also looking at how I thought Ten Hag did deal with the Zerbi ball quite well from a tactical point of view, but why Brighton are so hard to defend against, before towards the end of the video I analyse a few of Brighton's talents and where they should go this summer or maybe even next summer, and who United should potentially be interested in. This is going to be the first episode of my Atlantis Football Weekly. I am aiming to release 2 of these per week, one at the start, one at the end. But I will also release shorter clips from this video throughout the week as well. But the next episode should be out maybe Friday or Saturday, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when my videos come out. So as the game started, United are set up in a 2-3-2-3 possession shape with a 3 of Malacia, Casemiro and Wan-Bissaka, ahead of Shaw and Lindelof the centre-back pairing, with Weghorst and Eriksen sitting ahead of Casemiro in central midfield. But issues arose almost immediately, and obviously it has to do with United's ability to play out from the back, which I think has been a key reason for United's lack of control not just in this game, but throughout the best part of the second half of the season. You can see here as West Ham press with a front 2 of Paqueta and Antonio, that United aren't in a terrible build-out shape. If they had a keeper who was comfortable receiving possession under pressure in the same way that either Edison or Ramsdale are able to do, then we can effectively see a back 3, giving United a wide base to circulate the ball around West Ham's front 2, and then one of Malacia or Casemiro can drop into the space looking to split the West Ham pressing front 2, giving United almost a diamond-like build-up shape. However, United look like a side that want to try to play out of pressure but with no real strategy, and so when the first sign of issue comes about, they abandon the plan and go long. Here Lindelof plays a pass into Wan-Bissaka, and from here you can see West Ham's press is not that aggressive. You can see here that in field that no one is even close to Casemiro man-to-man pressing him, and so you should be able to play a pass into your right back and have him bounce the ball back into Casemiro, who can then turn and play forward, and you would have taken Antonio, Paqueta and the pressing Ben Rama out of the game. What happens instead is because Wan-Bissaka isn't the greatest technical right back, he is forced to take a touch, and with Lindelof rightly pushing forward, his only option is back to De Gea, and United go back and then De Gea goes along straight away under Antonio's pressure, lightly instructed by Ten Hag, but this now means that United give West Ham an aerial duel which they win, enabling them to regain possession in United's half. Now this was within the first 30 seconds of the game, and I could go on and show others, but I don't really see a point of going through a highlights reel of United's failed build-up. But if you are wondering, who cares if United aren't playing out from the back? Surely they can just win the loose ball in the middle of the park and restart the attack higher up the pitch. That is true, but it just means that you are constantly trying to recover possession, and more often than not West Ham were able to win the aerial duel and the loose ball in the middle of the park with Souček and Rice in there. And so it's no surprise that during the majority of United's long possession spells, it was mainly just Shaw and Lindelof playing square passes between them, in front of Antonio and Paqueta, rather than being able to work the ball into West Ham's half. But because of United's inability to play out, West Ham knew that if they really only initiated a press, they could force United long, as they do here with Antonio and Paqueta pressing from the front, and United don't even attempt to play through them, resulting in De Gea's clearance upfield and West Ham regaining possession in the middle third. United seemed to be wanting to bait West Ham to press them as Brighton do, but the press was initiated and then they would immediately abandon it, and so they never had the opportunity to exploit the space in behind West Ham's press, where players like Eriksen and Fernandes could receive the ball in space. Instead they constantly then had to regain possession and then try to thread passes through a now compact defensive shape with less spaces between the lines. And so I think it's clear to most people who don't have this insane pro-De Gea agenda that not only is De Gea a keeper who isn't good enough with the ball at his feet, but also a keeper who lacks the other abilities that are necessary as well, and overall as a keeper is declining. Ironically, for some reason, the exact people who have this wild pro-De Gea agenda are the ones who go around accusing other people of having an agenda. It's not an agenda if the reasons why people want him to be replaced are glaringly obvious. But De Gea is the best shot stopper in the world. He's not even close. And when we look at his FBref report, when compared against every other keeper in the Premier League this season, not in the whole of Europe, just in the Premier League, you can see that he only ranks in the 50th percentile for his post-shot XG minus goals allowed, which is sitting at negative 0.05 per 90, meaning that De Gea is letting in more goals than expected from the XG model. But stats don't mean anything for goalkeepers. Yes they do, you just don't understand the stats. It would be much more intellectually honest if the De Gea in brigade, who go around telling everyone else they have an agenda, agenda is, rather than pretending they understand the statistical side of the game, just admit that they don't understand how to use or interpret stats, and so they personally don't use them to judge players. Rather than pretending that stats are completely pointless, it's like a bottom set maths student going into the top set class and telling everyone that algebra doesn't matter and that it's pointless. But let's give the benefit of the doubt and say that De Gea is still a world class shot stopper. He's definitely not the best in the world, but let's just say he is at a high level, which I could maybe consider. He still falls short in other goalkeeping areas that aren't anything to do with the ball at his feet. For crosses in particular, we saw for West Ham's disallowed goal that De Gea has no commanding authority from crosses, as seen as despite ranking in the 57th percentile for the amount of crosses he's faced, 14 per 90, he only stops a measly 0.44 per 90, ranking in the 9th percentile, which works out at just 3.2%, ranking in just the 13th percentile when compared against every other keeper in the Premier League. You can also see that he ranks incredibly low for his defensive actions outside the penalty area as well, and all of this isn't even taking into account his incredibly poor ball playing ability. So the narrative that De Gea is a world class keeper and it's just his obsession with keepers being good with the ball at their feet which is driving him out the club is just not true at all, and is only an argument that can be made if you judge keepers like a 12-year-old watching their highlights reel. Yes, De Gea makes some outstanding saves, but a high percentage of these saves that get categorised as this are wildly overrated, and when it comes to other parts of his goalkeeping game, which is how you judge goalkeepers as a whole, De Gea isn't just not world class, he's actually incredibly poor. And so to me, number one, the people saying there is an anti-De Gea agenda don't know what an actual agenda is and just use a word because they saw it on Twitter. 2, they don't actually know how to interpret or use goalkeeping statistics, and so rather than admit their own deficiencies, pretend they don't matter at all. 3, they don't even know how to judge goalkeepers, they judge goalkeepers only by the saves they make from shots, rather than their positioning, cross-claiming, sweeping, etc. And 4, they don't understand how a good ball-playing keeper would improve United in possession. I'm pretty sure that people saying a goalkeeper isn't a priority judge what parts of the squad need to be improved as though it's FIFA. They look around at who are the worst players in the starting 11, and because De Gea doesn't fall into the bottom 3 or 4 players individually, they say he doesn't need to be replaced, failing to see the overall effect that putting in someone like Diogo Costa into the side would have. And to all the people who don't want Costa because he's made a mistake at the World Cup, De Gea's made far worse mistakes at least 3 times this season. Also, if you are one of these people who are judging Costa based on just the World Cup, that pretty much proves my point that you haven't actually watched him play at Porto, and you're judging a player off one 5-second clip that you saw, even though when the same thing is done to De Gea you call it an agenda. But I think it really comes down to the fact that most United fans only watch Manchester United, so their whole opinions of other players come down to how they played against United, which I think everyone with a fully functional brain would say is not the best way of judging which players United should sign. And so I think the debate about whether United need an improvement on De Gea in goal should pretty much be over now. There's even talk about him potentially being a second choice keeper on the bench and signing a new contract, which I just don't understand at all. Why would you re-sign a goalkeeper? It's not like his contract is expiring next summer, and so you're just going to keep him to the end of the contract. You're effectively re-signing him. So if he's not going to be for sure your number one, why would you re-sign him on what is going to be huge wages, 200, 250k a week? I mean, when Ten Hag came in, everyone was talking about how he needs to be ruthless, he needs to do this, talking specifically about getting rid of players like McTominay and Maguire. Getting rid of McTominay and Maguire isn't ruthless. Anyone can see that they need to go. What is being ruthless is getting rid of players who are fan favourites, who some fans think should stay, like De Gea, but in fact are holding the team back. That is what actually being ruthless in the transfer market is, and is what Ten Hag needs to do this summer. We saw Arteta do it with Aubameyang, we've seen Guardiola do it with Cancelo, and we saw Sir Alex Ferguson do it multiple times throughout his tenure with players like Ruud van Nistelrooy, David Beckham, Jaap Stam, and even nearly Wayne Rooney towards the end of his career. And so I just don't see the point in bringing in Ten Hag and wanting him to bring that Cruyffian Ajax style of football, but still wanting him to keep players like De Gea just because you like him. And so whilst without doubt De Gea is a Manchester United legend for what he's done at the club, and he should definitely be celebrated, Manchester United actually want to win trophies, compete for the Premier League and the Champions League, and not just keep players around because they're fan favourites. And so if Ten Hag truly is this ruthless manager that everyone is talking about him needing to be, De Gea will be replaced by the start of next season without doubt. So in the game against Brighton, Ten Hag aimed to stop De Zerbi's ping-pong ball progression through the centre of the pitch by using a 4-1-4-1 defensive shape with the 2 central midfielders ahead of Casemiro, Fred and Fernandes, pushing up tight onto the second line of Brighton's double square in the middle of the park. but crucially Ten Hag, rather than pressing with 2 forwards in a 4-4-2, used only 1 forward to pressurise the Brighton centre-backs, with Martial looking to split the centre-back pairing of Webster and Dunk, pressing from a more advanced position and coming from an angle, in order to cut off that square pass from one centre-back to the other that we know Brighton like to play, stopping the ball from moving directly to the other side of the pitch. And this is because Brighton like to utilise a lot of square passes from centre-back to centre-back in order to essentially bait the opposition press. I'm sure you've noticed the Brighton centre-back sometimes even putting their studs on the ball in open play, and this is because contrary to a lot of mainstream coaching, Brighton deliberately go against a number of different possession rules in order to deliberately entice the opposition's press and then play through the press and exploit the space behind it between the lines. And so this is why Brighton's attacks always seem like a counter-attack, with a lot of speed and vertical directness in their play, and seemingly always able to find space between the lines and drive the attack forward at pace. But that's not all. De Zerbi also instructs his central players to go against modern coaching theory, and instead of looking to move out of a pressing player's shadow in order to open up a passing lane, they instead look to stay in the shadow directly behind the player. And this is because despite the pass from the player with the ball to the player in the shadow being blocked, Brighton will look to move the ball into that particular player indirectly via a square pass across, enticing the press on the opposite side, but also opening up a different passing lane into the player in the previous player's pressing shadow. And so this would see McAllister and Gilmour do essentially what McTominay does unintentionally, which is holding a position behind a player and essentially hiding from the ball, but doing so with the expectation that the ball is passed on with a square pass, and another passing lane will open up, allowing Brighton to move the ball into them. But I thought particularly at the start of the game, United did a pretty good tactical job defensively, not being overly aggressive and making the same mistake that we saw Liverpool make. Klopp looked to press Brighton with 2 forwards, utilising a man-to-man press on the 6 Brighton players in the double square, but this just played into Brighton's hands as De Zerbi wants the opposition to do this, as he knows with a man-to-man press, the Brighton central players can manipulate the opposition's defensive system and shape, as Caicedo and Gross in the second line are able to do here, pulling over to the right side, dragging Thiago and Oxlade-Chamberlain over to the right, opening up space for McAllister in the third possession line to drop into, giving Brighton a temporary single pivot set up in the midfield 3, and because neither Henderson or Fabinho push up onto McAllister, fearful of the space they'll leave him behind, the Argentine World Cup winner can just drift into the space and opening up the passing lane for Dunk to play a line-breaking pass, progressing the ball in behind Liverpool's frontline press, taking the 3 Liverpool pressers out of the game, and McAllister can now turn and drive the attack forward. And this space was created because Liverpool went with a man-to-man press high up the pitch, but only really their frontline pressers, not really their midfield or defensive line. Afraid that their deeper defensive players would get pulled out of position, and so to avoid creating space in behind, they had to instead allow the space in front of the midfield to be created, and ultimately this was what allowed Brighton to play through their press. And so I think Ten Hag's decision for United to select certain opportunities to press Brighton high up, but also being prepared to drop off and allow Brighton out of their defensive third and even settle possession in the middle third. United used a vertically and horizontally compact defensive shape, whether this was a 4-1-4-1 high up the pitch or the 4-2-3-1 in their own half. And this horizontal compactness specifically came from the 2 wide midfielders retaining very narrow positions alongside Casemiro and Fred, giving United this incredibly compact defensive shape that Brighton at times struggled to play through in the fashion they have done throughout this season. However, when United did stray away from this conservative defensive shape, and Fred here for example would push up alongside Martial, looking to press Brighton a bit more aggressively, Brighton did seem to be able to seamlessly take advantage and cut through United, with Enciso dropping off into the space that Fred vacated alongside Casemiro, and Dunk being able to thread a static pass into his feet, allowing him to turn and then drive the attack forward, which is the objective of the 2 forwards Enciso and Welbeck when they do drop off into these kind of spaces. But De Zerbi also adapted Brighton's possession shape, moving from that 2-4 shape that we see them use in the build-up to a 2-3, with Caicedo inverting from right back and either McAllister or Estupiñán taking up a position on the left of the 3 next to Gilmour and the other pushing up the pitch, and this was done in order to realign the systems on the actual pitch, making it so that United were eventually paired up equal, man to man with Brighton, something that Ten Hag had looked to avoid at the start. And so you can see just how much De Zerbi's side want to invite this man-to-man press. Usually sides look to realign their system so the opposition can't man-to-man press them. However, Brighton do the opposite, and this gave Brighton greater success in playing through the centre of the pitch, as by shifting a player forward out of that second possession line, going from a 4 to a 3, Brighton could now have McAllister positioned higher up the pitch, and so when Dunk was able to slide a midfield splitting pass into the space between Fernandes and Casemiro, Enciso, who was being diligently followed by Lindelof, rather than having to try to swivel and turn with the Swede at his back, can instead flick the ball on into McAllister's path, who is essentially a free man sitting in behind Bruno Fernandes, and now Brighton have efficiently played through United's central midfield, with McAllister now carrying the ball into the final third. But even if everyone in your defensive system is alert and on time with their pressure, as United do here with Lindelof and Shaw, Brighton are so good at playing quickly through congested areas, using one-touch passing sequences, that they are still able to play through even the tightest pressure, with Enciso fantastic at dropping off from the forward line into space, and first time being able to play the pass around the corner into Welbeck. And when Welbeck can do the same, this allows Brighton to play right through United and get into a shooting position around the box, as they do here with Enciso. And they were able to do this even though both Lindelof and Shaw got incredibly tight to the Brighton front two, which if anything actually aided Brighton, as the space was then able to be created in the centre of the back line for Enciso to burst into after the 1-2. United on the other hand take the complete opposite approach to Brighton. Here we see that De Gea has a ball in his own box, and to all the people who seem to completely overlook the importance of ball playing ability in a keeper, this is the perfect example of how this is failing Ten Hag's system. Here we see that even though Brighton are man-to-man pressing United, it's very possible for United to play out of their defensive third, but they need to be prepared to play out under pressure, which they seem to be trying to avoid at all cost, mostly because of De Gea's short and long passing under pressure, and a lack of a true press-resistant deep-lying central midfielder, like what Brighton have with the likes of Caicedo, Gilmour and McAllister in those same positions. And so rather than De Gea looking to play this pass into Casemiro and have the Brazilian bounce a ball around Enciso out to Lindelof, allowing the Swede to then carry the ball out of the box, De Gea instead goes long with a fairly aimless clearance upfield, which Brighton win comfortably, allowing De Zerbi's team to regain possession and restart the attack in the middle third. And so this is a prime example of why not having a keeper or deeper lying midfielders who can play out of pressure leads to United ultimately having less of the ball and having less control of the game. But now that we've analysed the game against Brighton from a system point of view, let's take a look at some of their individual players. So we'll start off with Alexis McAllister, as he is probably the most well-known Brighton player after winning the World Cup with Argentina at the end of last year, and it's no surprise that he has been linked with multiple big clubs, specifically in the Premier League. I do often think with these diminutive, very creative, still relatively young kind of central midfielders, who do have the versatility to play multiple different roles in central midfield, but haven't yet managed to carve out that defined role that they will go on to excel in throughout the rest of their career, which I think does apply to McAllister at the moment. With these type of players, I do think they can be hit or miss in the Premier League, and there always is the element of uncertainty about how they will adapt to the physicality and pace of the Premier League, but also the massive jump in quality that comes week in, week out when playing in the Premier League compared to other leagues. And so when a player like Alexis McAllister comes into the league and starts to perform well with a club like Brighton, having a few seasons of Premier League experience and then improving year on year, and now legitimately being at the level where he could be a starter for a number of different top 6 sides, this dramatically increases his appeal to the likes of Manchester City, Manchester United, even Arsenal, who could potentially be interested in the type of midfielder that McAllister is and would have the money to get him out of Brighton. And combine that with the fact that he is now 24, 25 in December and has just 2 years left on his Brighton contract, presuming he isn't going to extend his contract beyond that, I think the summer could potentially be the right time for him to move on, with Brighton cashing in on a prized asset, and specifically after the World Cup and the season that he's had, his market value is probably at its peak right now, as if they wait till next summer he's going to have just 1 year left on his contract, significantly reducing the amount that Brighton can demand. And even though I don't think his potential is as high as players like Enciso, Caicedo, Matoma or Evan Ferguson, I do think that at the moment he's definitely a top 6 player, and if signed would go on to be a solid Champions League level player for the next 5, 6, even 7 seasons. I also think that he has a skill set that would be appealing to a number of different coaches, as we know that Pep Guardiola has been heavily inspired by De Zerbi this season, even going as far to say that Brighton were the best side in the build-up phase in the whole of Europe. And so with Pep Guardiola taking some inspiration from De Zerbi's style and applying it to this Manchester City side, changing from that 2-3 build-up shape to a 3-2, and also implementing that midfield box that De Zerbi's Brighton utilised so effectively, bringing in a player like McAllister to that Manchester City midfield with his press resistance, quick passing under pressure, as well as his added experience and understanding of how this De Zerbi build-up style actually works, You could see why Pep and Manchester City may actually be prepared to pay that sort of premium to get a player like him who's going to come in, understand the sort of system that Pep wants to implement almost straight away. And so the transition period is going to be a lot quicker, which is exactly what big clubs like Manchester City, who want to be competing year after year and improve their side year after year, want when they bring in a player. They don't want to have that adaptation period that maybe clubs like Brighton can afford. They need players to come in and make an impact straight away. Plus, McAllister is also well versed in playing out from the back under pressure with his back to goal in multiple different roles in De Zerbi's system, with this sort of press resistance being one of the rarest attributes in the modern game and a reason why Frankie de Jong is valued so highly by Erik ten Hag and his Barcelona teammates. İlkay Gündoğan's contract is up at the end of the season, and I personally think now is a good time for Gündoğan to move on, start a new challenge, and for City to get his wages off of the books and reinvest in that area. Personally, I think Barcelona should bring him in on a 2-year contract with a club option of a third, as despite being 33 in October, I think Gündoğan can follow in the footsteps of his German compatriot Michael Ballack in continuing to play that goal-scoring midfielder role well into his mid-30s, the exact role he has been thriving in under Pep for the last few years. And Gündoğan and McAllister, like Ballack, all excel in the same sort of box-to-box goal-scoring midfielder role, which to me shows that it makes sense for Gündoğan to move to Barcelona, still being able to perform at his current level for at least another 2 seasons in my opinion, arriving without a transfer fee on pretty decent wages of around £6 million a year, with City replacing him with McAllister in Pep's midfield for between 60 and 70 million pounds. For United, I would take McAllister, but I'd rather have Kovacic ahead of him on the list, because despite being 4 or 5 years older, I do think he's currently a better player than McAllister and would only cost around 25 million pounds with just 1 year left on his Chelsea contract. But for the sort of money that McAllister would cost, I'd rather just pay a bit extra for Frankie de Jong if it is possible, or ideally bring in Moises Caicedo instead, as I think he's more of the type of midfielder that United need, which to be fair is probably the same for every top club alongside Manchester City at the moment. And you could even say the same for Matoma as well, as I genuinely believe that all 3 of Caicedo, McAllister and Matoma would all be good enough to get into a top club and be a key first team player. A real testament to Brighton's recruitment. I have got a whole in-depth analysis on Moises Caicedo coming out very soon, but in short, I think he's potentially one of the best midfielders of this generation, being an incredible ball winner as his FB Rev report alone shows, having that tenacity and aggression combined with the tackling ability and reading of the game to make him a ball winning weapon. And now under De Zerbi's coaching, he now has the ability and understanding to play in a system that prioritises not just playing out from the back under pressure, but by using quick 1 and 2 touch passing to slice through the centre of the opposition's midfield. I think Caicedo would be perfect for Manchester United or Liverpool if either could afford him this summer at the base of their midfields, with Caicedo playing alongside Casemiro with Fernandes ahead, whilst also potentially being that long-term replacement and current upgrade on Fabinho, though I do think with it looking likely that Liverpool could miss out on Bellingham to Real Madrid, McAllister could be the better option if Liverpool had the choice between the 2 Brighton central midfielders, whereas I do think sides like United and Chelsea should target Caicedo over McAllister. I do also think it would be interesting to see how Caicedo would evolve as a player under either Arteta or Guardiola, as well as I do think his long-term position is obviously going to be as a ball-winning central midfielder. I do think the experiment of using him as a fullback could work, with him inverting into a deeper central midfield possession in the build-up phase during settled possession in the middle third, whilst also holding that deeper recovery position in a 2-3, 3-2 or a 2-2 recovery shape behind the ball when his side have the ball in the final third, sitting behind the play and almost as security, waiting for the opportunity to use his athleticism, physicality, aggression and tackling ability to stop potential counter-attacks before they are even allowed to progress into the City or Arsenal half, but dropping out to that fullback position when the opposition do eventually manage to establish settled possession. Essentially how Eduardo Camavinga is currently being deployed for Ancelotti's Real Madrid. I think even if City do win the treble this season, I think significantly re-strengthening this summer has to be done. Caicedo could play both as a fullback and as a ball-winning defensive midfielder, and would cost around £80 million, effectively £40 million per area. And if I was City, this would be the rebuild I would go with. When in that 3-2-5 WM possession formation, a starting lineup of either Edison or Ortega in goal, Laporte or Ake, and then 2 of Diaz, Akanji, Walker or Caicedo, Rodri or Manuel Ugarte, who I'd bring in for around £55 million from Sporting Lisbon this summer, Stones or Rico Lewis then alongside them in the double pivot, pushing up from either the fullback or centre-back position, with De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva completing the box midfield, positioned on the side of their strongest foot so that they can overlap either Grealish or Rafael Leao, who'd likely be available for between 60 and 70 million pounds this summer, even though he has got 1 year left on his AC Milan contract. And Foden or Mahrez would start on the right flank, with Cole Palmer and Tommy Doyle capable of filling in for Kevin De Bruyne or Bernardo Silva if they are missing. Or if not the two City young players, City could also look to bring in potential England stars in my opinion, like James Maddison or Jacob Ramsey to play that role, in behind Erling Haaland or Julian Alvarez. But to be honest, I could also see McAllister, Matoma and even Pascal Gross, despite him being 32 years old, being good signings for City this summer. But particularly Matoma, as like Caicedo, I think he's on the verge of blossoming into a world-class player, in the same way that Son and Saka have done from that wide forward winger-esque position in North London, and how Rashford has, and Anthony needs to develop into at Manchester United. See, City seems like it would perfectly suit Matoma and vice versa, with him coming in to be the long-term upgrade to Jack Grealish. Evan Ferguson is likely to stay one more season, maybe even two I would imagine, with Manchester United being a potential long-term destination for the Irishman, along with Newcastle I would say as well. In 2 years time, still with 3 years left on his contract, which runs now until 2028, Ferguson may be worth upwards of £100 million. So the fact that he may be attainable this summer for between 50 and 60 million pounds may force a Premier League side to make a move for him early. He joined Brighton's under-23s from Bohemians in Ireland for around £500,000 in 2021, aged 16. And so yet again, even already with Ferguson only having played a handful of games in the first team, his potential is clear, reflecting extremely well on the Brighton scouting team. But the talent level doesn't stop there. Ferguson, Matoma, Caicedo and McAllister already look like signings as stuff of Football Manager folklore. But I would also add Julio Enciso, Facundo Bonetti and potentially both Billy Gilmore and Levi Colwill if they were signed permanently this summer, alongside Tariq Lamptey if he recovers from his long-term injury, to that list. Now before I come on to a couple of those other players, in terms of how Caicedo could fit into Arteta's Arsenal, I could see him being deployed in this role and allowing Ben White to potentially move infield into a centre-back position when needed, though I think Arteta's side should instead look to sign Declan Rice, as that ball-winning midfielder who can also be a great progressor of the ball, alongside Thomas Partey for a similar amount of money, maybe even slightly less, and then you could look to use him when appropriate as a ball-playing centre-back, moving out as a libero in possession, leaving Ben White to shuttle across and close up the space next to Saliba or Gabriel. But for me, a player who isn't spoken about highly enough is Julio Enciso, who reminds me a lot of Carlos Tevez, being a stocky centre forward with exceptional technical ability, who can drop off from the forward line and link the play, but also has the ability in the final third to get into goal scoring positions, and can produce that bit of magic via a long shot which he showed against Chelsea, or linking the play efficiently with a 1-2 as he did against United. He's only played just over 500 minutes in the Premier League for Brighton this season, so we can't really judge him statistically that accurately, but just from the eye test, I think you have to say he's one of the most promising young centre forwards in world football, and he's one of those players who I could see getting a really big move in the next 2 to 3 years, and I think he is destined for a Barcelona, Real Madrid or a Manchester United. For United he would be a significant gamble, likely costing 50 to 60 million pounds this summer at the very least, and he's only just turned 19 in January, but I would certainly put him on the same level as players like Højlund and Sesko. But unlike those two, Enciso is a much better technical forward and would suit playing that deep lying forward false 9 role, particularly with how good he is at linking the play when dropping off from the forward line, a critical skill to have in the modern game, which would enable United to take advantage of high pressing sides that push their midfield high up and leave space in behind for Enciso to drop into. I could also see him at Arsenal, but maybe he's a bit too similar to Jesus, and signing a more natural advanced forward like Sesko would make more sense for Arsenal. But this summer, if United or even Chelsea were to pay £60 million to sign him, I think it would be a good signing for either team. And Brighton's scouting department just seem to have a knack of being able to find these hidden gems who are not just very good players, but also an incredibly rare type of players, and I think Matoma epitomises this. In world football I'd probably say only Leao, Mbappe, Kvaratskhelia and Martinelli off the top of my head are players on his level in terms of his one-on-one dribbling, and so with teams now looking to go man for man in the press and leaving their fullbacks isolated against opposition wingers, having a player like Matoma who is capable of beating players at ease down the left flank is is incredibly valuable, and so I think Mitoma would be an excellent fit at Manchester City next season as a long-term Jack Grealish upgrade. He'd cost around £70 million this summer, with him having just 2 years left on his contract, and so Brighton may be inclined to sell. Even Pascal Gross seems like a player to me who either Arsenal or Manchester City could take a gamble on. He is 32 in June, but he's a type of James Milner-like player who I could see retaining this level until 34 or 35, given his high football intelligence, experience playing in multiple different positions and roles in a De Zerbi-like system. I think for around £20 million or so, I think he'd be an excellent asset to either Arteta or Guardiola's squads. So quick fire, let's auction off these Brighton players like a prime Jorge Mendes. Mitoma to me is a player who Brighton could look to cash in this summer for around £70 million, with City being the best destination in my opinion. Ideally they'd keep hold of Caicedo for at least one more season, but if I'm Manchester United, Chelsea, or really any top club barring Madrid or Barcelona, I'm trying to bring in Caicedo for around £75 million tops. McAllister to me seems like a player who could also be a good fit at City as a Gundogan replacement, though I think Pep would rather Mitoma, and so I think McAllister to Liverpool either this summer but likely next summer makes a lot of sense for around £60 million, with his contract running until 2025 and Brighton having the option of extending it by 1 year. And Enciso to me should definitely stay at Brighton for at least one more season, although if I'm Manchester United, Barcelona or even Real Madrid, I'm keeping a close eye on him, ready to make a £60 million bid even this summer if the opportunity is there. And I haven't even spoken about Facundo Buonanotte or gone into detail on Evan Ferguson, who like Enciso is an incredible talent, but I did do a whole analysis video on whether United should sign him, so I'll leave that linked in the description if you want to check it out after this video. So thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this longer format video, let me know in the comments. I am aiming to put out at least 2 of these per week alongside a Patreon podcast, and I will also put out some highlight clips of these videos as well on the channel as well, in case you don't want to watch the whole thing. But remember to subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you do get notified when my videos come out. The next video should be out maybe Friday or Saturday.